Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of COP28 in Context. And my guest for today is Dr. Rajendra Shende, the former director of the United Nations Environment Program and the coordinating lead author of IPCC, which won the Nobel Peace Prize for its path-breaking work on climate change. Interestingly enough, Dr. Shende writes an exclusive monthly column on the upcoming COP28 in Climate Control Middle East magazine. Dr. Shende, thank you for being in the show.
Thank you, Surendar, and thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, Dr. Shende. So, Dr. Shende, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released the fourth and final part of the sixth assessment report, AR6, in March 2023. You wrote about it in your column in the April 2023 issue of Climate Control Middle East magazine. How will the report inform discussions during COP28 later this year in the UAE? I ask because the last IPCC report, AR5, was released in 2014, just before the path-breaking COP21, famously known as the Paris Agreement.
Yes, indeed, Surendar. I think both the reports came at the very crucial times. And you referred to AR5, which was just before the Paris Climate Agreement. And it really brought the whole world together on a totally different path of what is called as a equal responsibility and not a divided responsibility between developed and developing countries. So that was the achievement of Paris Climate Agreement, and probably the part of the credit will go to IPCC AR5. AR6 comes at a time when we are seeing a very gloomy view of what is happening around us in terms of climate change. And since Paris Climate Agreement, we already had about 7 to 8 years gone. And AR6 took a pretty long time to get released for the working group 1, 2, 3 synthesis report. And March 23, just about 8 to 9 months before COP28. It's really coming as an opportune time. But I would call it an opportune time only in terms of what is called as a timing. But it's coming at the very bad, serious, and frustrating times for the climate change. One of the things that we must realize is we have accept our failure for the last 7-8 years not to move as per what is agreed in the Paris Climate Agreement. So we have, if I may say so, 8 years of failure. We wanted to reduce our emissions. We wanted to bend the curve at least of the rising emission graph, but we are not able to do it. Maybe the slight respite that we have is that the rate of increase of emissions has reduced. And I don't know whether you call it a success or that is called as a probably very neutral view of looking at it. I won't even call it a mixed success. I would definitely call it as a gross failure, a collective failure of the world leaders and individuals of the world citizens not to collectively address this issue.
It's interesting. You use words like gloomy and failure repeatedly, and I'm going to refer to your article again. And you also quoted UNEP's 2022 emission gap report, and went on to say that much more massive reduction in emissions is needed, and that the window is closing. That was quite dramatic, I found. You spoke of how the world is not on track to reach the Paris Agreement goals, and that global temperatures can reach 2.8 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. Now, for me, these words sound alarming. Would you care to elaborate? I mean, how can the HVACR industry help balance the need for cooling and refrigeration with the urgent need to lower the emission of greenhouse gases?
Well, Surendar, there are two parts to your questions. Number one is how gloomy the picture is based on what is the UNEP's what is called as a EGR, emission gap report, which UNEP produces almost every year. And the last one was just before the Egypt meeting, COP27. And this emission gap reports, right from the climate agreement, Paris Climate Agreement, it has been showing that we are just keeping this gap without any possibility of closing it. I mean, there are very specific targets that have been given in a Paris Climate Agreement, that we have to keep a temperature below 1.5 degrees centigrade. That is a sort of an difficult part of it as compared to the pre-industrial emission levels, but definitely not above 2 degrees centigrade. That's what Paris Climate Agreement said. And we have not been closing the gap between what is needed to be achieved and where we are. And that's what the UNEP report keeps on telling about. And that gap is widening so much that we are now saying that instead of 2, we will definitely reach 2.8 degrees centigrade. But there are estimates. Even the latest AR6 is telling that probably we are on a track of reaching 3.5 degrees centigrade or even 3.8 degrees centigrade. Remember that atmospheric chemistry is a chaotic chemistry, but still we are doing a brave efforts to pin it down, pin that chaos down to certain definite numbers. But however you try to pin it down, the chaos continues mainly because we are not taking action. And we don't know in what way now we can take action. The reason being that most of these greenhouse gases, once emitted, they will remain in the atmosphere for 100 years. So even if you close it down now, there is a possibility that we will never be able to keep the temperature rise below 2 degrees centigrade. The latest report of WMO, which was released on 17th of May, had said that there is a 66% or nearly 70% possibility that one of the years in next 5 years will cross 1.5 degrees centigrade. That will be gross failure. Now let's see about your second part. Second part question is how the heat, air conditioning industry, the heating and air conditioning industry can help. Frankly speaking, I think that particular industry, HVAC, has a great role to play simply because some of the greenhouse gases that they use in the refrigerants are short-lived compounds. They don't live as long as carbon dioxide, that is 100 years. So if you take an action on what is called as a short-lived climate pollutant, and the example is some of the short-lived climate pollutant, HFC 32, which is not a final solution, but at least it gives you a respite. And there could be others who would help us to remove the GHGs from the atmosphere in much shorter term. But as you know, the HVAC industry contribution of refrigerants is not more than 10%. The real contribution of emission comes from the energy that you use it. So imagine that you have the energy coming from renewable and the HVAC industry uses it with the refrigerants which are short-lived. I think we are going to get a great respite. And that is the crack open window which I'm talking about. And the HVAC industry has a real great role to play to utilize that crack of the window to get out of this climate challenge.
I see. Okay. So I'm going to take these words from this meeting when you spoke about possibility of temperatures rising to even 3.5 degrees centigrade, 3.8 degrees centigrade. So that calls for urgent action. We have to be serious about what we're doing. And also how you spoke about a definite role for the HVACR industry. So I think much needs to be done. I think the whole world is looking at what's going to unfold at COP28. And with that, we conclude this episode of COP28 in context. We shall discuss more in the next episode. To just remind our viewers, once again, Dr. Shende's exclusive article appears every month in Climate Control Middle East magazine. You may access past parts of the article by visiting ccme.news and accessing the e-magazines of past issues and the current one. I'm immensely grateful to Dr. Shende for coming to the show. So thank you, Dr. Shende, for so patiently answering my questions. I really, I feel all viewers learn quite a lot from this interaction.
Thank you. Thank you, Surendar.
So it was a pleasure having you. And so till we meet again, this is Surendar Balakrishnan